The house, despite its age, stood firmly on its foundation. With a flick of a switch, the old man lit a dim bulb that faintly illuminated the narrow staircase leading down to the basement. Cautiously, we descended one by one, the old man in front, me following. As we advanced, the light grew brighter and brighter, revealing a granite slab floor flooded with a narrow strip of daylight streaming in through a small window above us. A pleasant coolness enveloped us, and a light breeze danced around our bodies. "I think it's the old ventilation system," the old man remarked, as if he had read my mind. "Do you feel a draft?" "Yes, a slight one," I replied, turning to face him. "This cellar is impressive. It's spacious and dry. I've made my decision. I'm buying this house." "Very good," he nodded in agreement. "Let's go upstairs and draw up the necessary paperwork. The notary is waiting patiently." "Oh, he can wait a little longer. Waiting is part of his job." I grinned, taking my time climbing the stairs. Eventually, we reached the hallway where the notary stood patiently. The old man signed the deed of gift, and I handed him the agreed amount. The notary officially acknowledged receipt of the money, and just like that, I became the proud owner of an old 2-story house in the historic district of the city. Real estate in this neighborhood was quite expensive, so buying this house for a relatively modest sum seemed like a stroke of luck to me. As I strolled through the narrow streets, I found solace in the beloved old architecture. One fateful day, I encountered the old man who sat on a bench. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and I unintentionally divulged my troubles to him. Showing genuine care, he invited me to his house for a cup of tea. Entering the house for the first time, I immediately fell in love with its charm. The old man seemed to understand my infatuation, sharing that he lived alone there as his children had all moved away. Maintaining such a large house was proving to be challenging for him. Suddenly, a thought came to him, and he quietly suggested that I purchase the house. Without hesitation, I agreed as the price was reasonable and I had the means. However, I requested that he make a deed of gift to protect my ownership in the future. The house welcomed me with open arms, adorned with antique furniture, clocks, and lamps. Upstairs on the second floor, I discovered a cozy bedroom and an inviting study, accessible through the grand living room. Downstairs on the first floor, there was a spacious kitchen, a bathroom, and a grand hall. Lastly, there was a dry and cool basement, offering storage for my future endeavors. For a long time, I had dreamed of opening my own antique store, and this house in the historic part of town was the ideal location. As the notary completed the paperwork and left, I received a notification on my cell phone. It was my wife, inquiring about my whereabouts as usual. During our brief conversation, she informed me that she would be celebrating Harper's birthday with her friends and would be returning home late. Sensing her urgency, I offered to pick her up, but she declined, emphasizing the importance of supervising our son James with his upcoming math test. The call ended with her sending her kisses. I'm fortunate to have Olivia as my wife. She is an exceptional woman who excels in her roles as a wife, mother, and hostess, always managing everything with ease. When I arrived home, I found my son already having dinner and engrossed in his computer. I asked him about his lessons, but he barely acknowledged me, too focused on the screen. Lately, I've been struggling to connect with him, and surprisingly, my wife has supported his reluctance to communicate with me. It often seemed as though she was intentionally driving a wedge between us. However, I eventually discovered the reason behind my son's behavior, and I stopped trying so hard to bridge the gap. Up until 6 months ago, my family life was seemingly perfect. I had been married to Olivia for 16 years. We tied the knot when I was 22, and she was 20. It was entirely her initiative to take our relationship to the next level. After a lukewarm 6-month courtship, Olivia underwent a dramatic transformation. She started calling me incessantly, almost imposing her presence on me. She built a strong bond with my mother, going so far as to visit and spend time at our house. Eventually, my mother began encouraging me to propose to Olivia, insisting that she was a wonderful girl not to be let go. Olivia's parents also joined in, further reinforcing her desire to marry me. Despite my reservations, I finally succumbed to their persuasion and proposed. Unsurprisingly, Olivia eagerly accepted, and just 3 months later, we were married. However, my father never took a liking to Olivia. However, he made the choice to remain silent and stay out of the marital affairs of women, observing from the sidelines as his own son was being seduced. When Olivia and I got married, she was already 2 months pregnant. Being a decent man, I felt obligated to marry her, and 7 months later James was born. Our parents helped us purchase a 2-room apartment, ensuring that we had no issues with everyday life. In the first 5 years, everything was going well. My profession was as an art historian, and after 8 years of working in a museum, I unexpectedly found a job in a prominent antique firm. Alongside my expertise, I was also involved in consulting collectors and gaining practical experience in the field. Gradually, I built my own clientele and gained a certain level of respect among them. Olivia worked in a real estate firm, and James was growing up. As he grew older, he looked less and less like me. I didn't discuss this matter with Olivia, fearing that it might unintentionally offend her. However, I confided in my mother, who dismissed my concerns with a wave of her hand. She assured me that children can look completely different from their fathers and questioned who he might take after. A neighbor, perhaps. She emphasized that this didn't mean he wasn't my son. Furthermore, my mother warned me not to confuse myself and to never traumatize Olivia and James. After my father's untimely death, my mother made an unexpected decision to transfer ownership of her apartment to her grandson, effectively leaving me out of the picture. Confused and hurt, I asked her about this decision. She nonchalantly replied, "It doesn't matter, because James is your son." During our conversation, she casually let it slip that Olivia had counseled her on the matter and even brought in a notary. It was then that I sensed something was wrong. 2 more years passed and my mother died and the apartment was left to rent out. To my surprise, the income from renting out the apartment ended up with my wife. As she liked to say, like pins in her pocket. All was well in my family until, while dialing my wife's number, I accidentally stumbled upon her conversation with a strange man. At first I thought about disconnecting, but curiosity took over. Without realizing it, I involuntarily pressed the record button on my phone. To my horror, I found my beloved wife Olivia talking about how tired she was of being with me and expressing her desire to leave our marriage. It was like a sharp wasp sting right on the top of my head, followed by a sledgehammer blow. My consciousness staggered as if I were being attacked by a swarm of wild wasps. Every impulse felt like a jackhammer, and my limbs remained weak. I struggled to catch my breath. At first, my instinct told me to confront the man on the other end of the line and lash out at my wife, letting my emotions overwhelm me. However, as my anger began to subside, I realized that this approach would only lead to more problems. I realized the futility of seeking revenge or getting my wife to confess. I remember wandering aimlessly through the damp fall streets, repeatedly replaying the recorded conversation. It was imprinted in my memory, causing pain in my soul. I wanted to raise my head and let out a wolf howl into the empty expanse of the fall sky. Eventually, I pulled myself together and retreated to my office, gathering all my willpower to suppress my emotions. I began to strategize and think about possible ways out of this catastrophic situation. Overhearing Olivia's conversation with an unknown man made it clear to me that James was not my biological son. In an attempt to confirm this suspicion, I discreetly took the biomaterials to the medical examiner's office for analysis, keeping it a secret from my wife. 3 days later, the results of the analysis confirmed my fears. James is indeed not my biological child. This discovery shed light on the haste of our marriage. It seems Olivia had gotten pregnant outside of our relationship and was eager to legitimize the pregnancy at all costs. I was just a stupid pawn in her game. In retrospect, I now understand why my father immediately disliked Olivia when they first met. Deep down, he must have sensed something was wrong. It seems like the biological father was initially reluctant to become a parent, but circumstances change. It is possible that Olivia reconnects with him and they decide to build a life together, including a shared son. My purpose as a fool in Olivia's scheme seems to have been fulfilled, and now it's time for her to cast me aside and build a strong family with her new love. It's as if they're reuniting, leaving me in the role of bystander. As a result, a bleak future awaits me. Our parents' apartment, which should have gone to James, now goes to Olivia. In the midst of a divorce, our courts, with their gender bias and feminist sentiments, will likely favor her, leaving me without financial stability. Even the car and other assets will likely end up in Olivia's possession, leaving me with only a paltry sum if I'm lucky. I find myself in a state of despair, not knowing how to deal with this unexpected turn of events. I had some savings through work, but like many husbands, I almost gave my entire paycheck to gain access to my wife's body. It felt like I was both an ATM for her and just a tool for pleasure. Consequently, the prospects for my future are dim. Frankly speaking, I am confused and do not know how to act in this situation. It seems as if my role as a husband has been merely transactional, leaving me feeling vulnerable and insecure. The future seems bleak and hope is very limited. After learning the truth about my son, I set out to discover the identity of Olivia's lover and disrupt their deceptive scheme. To my amazement, it turned out that her longtime partner and James's father was none other than my boss. It turned out that Olivia had orchestrated this elaborate plan from the beginning. She'd successfully landed me a job at Alliance Antiques, where Christopher, the director, and her lover reigned supreme. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Olivia used me as a pawn, manipulating me into providing for our child while she pursued her own agenda. 16 years ago, Christopher was trapped in a loveless marriage. The firm and his wife held all the wealth and power, so he couldn't openly demand a divorce. However, after his wife's recent passing, he had the opportunity to inherit the fortune and reunite with Olivia and our son. Olivia, who did not like to sit idly by, had even managed to bargain my parents for an apartment as a kind of compensation for the years we had lived together. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, and I couldn't shake the feelings of betrayal and anger. I couldn't pretend to know everything, but I tried to play my part convincingly. I'd gone out of my way to please Olivia, keeping my guard up and ensuring my loyalty in her eyes. The same was true for my boss. I tried to prove my loyalty and dedication, unknowingly becoming a source of amusement to Olivia and Christopher. They must have been enjoying the anticipation of the moment when they would eventually betray me. But in that moment, when I felt defeated and didn't know what to do next, a life-changing event occurred. It was a turning point that lit a fire in me and inspired me to take further action. With renewed vigor, I vowed to untangle their insidious web and protect not only myself, but also the innocent child at the center of events. Forewarned and armed, I was ready for any challenge and for justice to be served. Throughout his life, my father dedicated his career to accounting. However, he had two passions that remained steadfast: numismatics and ancient Japanese poetry. My mother, like any spouse, once attempted to deter his interests, dismissing them as trivial. Eventually, though, she simply waved it off and let my father indulge in his hobbies undisturbed. Evenings would find him sitting at his desk, immersed in the world of coins. Unfortunately, when he passed away, his prize collection seemed to vanish into obscurity. No one paid much attention to it, not even my mother, and I was preoccupied with bettering our family's welfare. Thus, the collection faded from memory. One evening, out of the blue, my aunt, my father's sister, called me. Our conversation mostly revolved around trivial matters, and I wasn't particularly talkative due to the melancholy that weighed on me. Suddenly, Aunt Sophia mentioned something that caught me off guard. She revealed that right before my father's passing, he had entrusted her with a locked valise and requested that she hand it over to me. Unfortunately, she got caught up in her own affairs and entirely forgot about it. But that day, as she rummaged through the mezzanine, she stumbled upon the valise amongst a pile of junk. Although she was unaware of its contents, she offered to give it back to me anytime I desired. I'll admit, I didn't give the conversation much thought at the time. I simply promised to swing by and collect my inheritance when possible. 5 days later, I found myself in the vicinity of my aunt's residence and finally obtained my father's valise. Eagerly, I brought it to work and attempted to unlock its secrets. However, much to my frustration, I couldn't find a way to open it. The valise was crafted with thin titanium sheets and adorned with a layer of leather. Without a key, the only means of unlocking it was with an autogen. However, using such a tool posed a risk to the unknown contents inside, and I hesitated to proceed without knowing what lay within. I felt a strong urge to uncover the contents of my father's valise, even though I didn't quite understand why. The only obstacle standing in my way was the missing key. However, upon further reflection, I reasoned that if my father had entrusted me with the valise, he must have known that I would eventually find the key. Determined to search for additional clues, I decided to reach out to Aunt Sophia, hoping she might have some insight. After a brief conversation with Aunt Sophia, she mentioned that she had my father's old notebook. Intrigued, I wasted no time and immediately made my way to her place to collect it. As I flipped through the pages of the leather-bound notebook, I found nothing particularly interesting. However, my attention was captured by the numbers and letter inscribed on the cover, which happened to be my birth year and the initial of my name. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized that it resembled a code for a safety deposit box. Trying to approach the situation logically, I recalled that my father had difficulty walking in recent years due to an old injury. This led me to believe that he must have chosen a bank in close proximity to our old apartment. Knowing my father's meticulous nature, I deduced that he would have preferred a state-owned bank, one that was less vulnerable to the uncertainties of the market economy. With this in mind, I set out to search for a suitable bank nearby. An hour later, I entered the end branch of the bank, greeted by a pleasant young woman in a stylish black skirt, white blouse, and a scarf wrapped around her neck. I explained my situation. With a sweet smile, she kindly asked me to wait and disappeared through the door that led to the inner workings of the bank. To my surprise, a cup of coffee was soon brought to me, showcasing their exceptional service. After 30 minutes, a representative approached me and requested that I follow him. I found myself in a spacious office, accompanied by the head of the bank's security service and a senior teller. They instructed me to provide a code and my father's initials. Following their inquiries, a long, narrow box was placed before me. The box was opened, leaving me alone in its presence. Inside, I discovered a package containing a white metal ring with my father's initials engraved on it, alongside a small key and a figure of a samurai wielding two Japanese swords. Curiosity getting the better of me, I tried on the ring, finding that it fit perfectly on the ring finger of my right hand. Soon, the occupant of the office returned, and I proceeded to sign various documents to finalize the closing of the safety deposit box. Finally, accompanied by the bank staff, I was escorted towards the exit. I returned to my workstation and carefully inserted the key into the keyhole under the handle of the valise. With a satisfying click, the lock unlocked, and the valise opened, revealing its contents. To my surprise, there were many coins in the valise, each more valuable than the last. Without a second thought, I spread the coins out on the table, making sure the door was closed securely behind me. What I saw shocked me. These were not ordinary coins, but rare and expensive treasures. Among them were Spanish macuquinas of the Conquista times, and a full set of Soviet coins of 1958, and banknotes, and even silver dollars of the Confederate States of America during the Civil War. Each coin was accompanied by certificates of authenticity and proof of ownership. It was an extraordinary find, a veritable treasure trove. As someone with experience in the antique business, I couldn't help but be amazed. It was obvious at a glance that these coins were of considerable value. Yet I couldn't escape the feeling that I was living in a dream. As I carefully placed the coins back in my valise, I thought about how this unexpected winnings could solve my predicament. I thought of simply getting a divorce and using my newfound wealth to make a fresh start. However, the bitterness of the stolen 16 years resurfaced in my soul. These despicable people deprived me not only of time, but also the opportunity to raise my own child, my rightful heir. It was a profound loss, robbing me of my primary purpose as a man, to leave behind an inheritance. After everything I had been through, it seemed wrong to just walk away. After making the decision to purchase a car, I opted for a Porsche Cayenne, believing it to be the perfect choice. I secured a parking space for it not far from our family home, And as you know, we also invested in a house in a historic part of town. Without wasting any time, I enlisted the help of designers and a construction crew the following day. It took a month and a half, but eventually, a new antique company and store emerged in town. Surprisingly, my client base began gravitating towards this newfound competition, resulting in the downfall of our firm, Alliance. Constant inspections, customer exodus to rival businesses, and a myriad of other difficulties burdened the head of the company. Employee retention became a challenge, with even the secretary of the general director deciding to part ways. The once successful antique businessman, Christopher, was a mere shadow of his former self, devoid of his former sparkle. In the end, I found myself as the sole remaining employee at the firm. Unbeknownst to Christopher, Olivia's behavior had changed as well. Her moments of absence during evenings diminished significantly, and she showered me with an unprecedented level of care and affection. I continued to pretend ignorance, embracing the role of a deceived and foolish husband with gusto. And finally, I realized my childhood dream. I bought a mansion outside the city, located in a beautiful pine forest, where there used to be a forestry area. Along with this, I also bought a pedigree Central Asian sheepdog. With that was over, it was time to move on to the final phase of my plan. It was at this point that the Alliance firm was denied a lease on the space due to overdue rent. The new antique firm had already paid a huge amount of money to rent the space, and the director of Alliance had been given 3 days' notice to vacate the space. On the last day, I called Olivia and asked her to attend my workplace. She was surprised, but agreed. Together, we entered Christopher's office. Olivia sensed something was wrong, but continued to play dumb. When we sat down at the table, I silently laid out a stack of photos revealing the affair between my wife and my boss. Believe me, it was quite a scandal. The expressions on their faces were priceless. I even began to fear that Christopher might have a stroke. Olivia remained unperturbed, only tears streaming down her cheeks. I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. I turned on the tape recorder, and the voices of two lovers came into the room, discussing the possibility of getting rid of me. I didn't interrupt them. They had earned the right to indulge in their downfall. Without looking back, I stood up and headed for the door. David. Olivia's voice was filled with a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, frustration, and finally fear. Wait, you've got it all wrong. I didn't turn around. Shit, it's a cliche. All I need to hear is, it's not what you think. As I walked to my car, I couldn't help but look up, my mind overwhelmed with a mixture of emotions. Olivia and the ex-chief, as white as chalk, gazed from the window on the second floor. After politely bowing, I waved, disarmed the alarm, and settled into the driver's seat. In that instant, it seemed as though the samurai hanging from the chain swung his swords and winked at me. Igniting the engine, I merged into the bustling flow of cars, perpetually racing against time.